Hey everybody, welcome back to the SuperBake podcast. I'm your host, Baker. Let's talk about stuff. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. So, as promised, I'm going to give my spoiler-filled review of Spider-Man Across the Spiderverse, which just came out earlier this month. I wanted to get this review up sooner, but I really wanted to take the time to kind of put my thoughts together on this. So just going to go over my thoughts on it. As usual, this is going to contain a lot of spoilers, so if you haven't seen the movie, just consider this your warning. Direct sequel to Into the Spiderverse, which came out in 2018. Apparently, they planned this movie as part of a trilogy. So there's going to be another movie coming out March of next year, Beyond the Spiderverse, which is supposed to be the ending of this movie series. But the film takes place a couple years after Into the Spiderverse. We follow Miles Morales. We get to see more of what he's doing. He's established himself as a very capable Spider-Man in this film. We see that in the first film, he was kind of a rookie. He didn't really know much about web-slinging and being a superhero. In this one, that's definitely far from the case. He can handle himself. We actually see him take on one of his first big solo enemies in the movie, a character called The Spot, played by Jason Schwartzman, who at first seems to be like kind of a nobody criminal, kind of comical. Like it's clear that like Morales in the first movie, he doesn't really quite understand his abilities. He's able to create these portals, like these rifts in space and time, and kind of move through these portals. And he's using them in a really funny scene to try to rob a convenience store and take the ATM. And there's a fight between him and Miles that breaks out. But as the film progresses, the Spot turns into a bigger and bigger threat. Like his power kind of grows as he gains better control over it. And he goes from being kind of a no-name villain into being a pretty threatening menace, especially towards probably the halfway through the film. On top of that, we get to see Gwen Stacy and what she's been up to during this time in a very heartfelt and emotional opening to the film. I think it was like 10 minutes long, where we get to see her universe, the way things have been playing out with her, the impact the events of the first movie had on her, as well as more of her past. We get to see more of what happened with her. And then we get to see kind of, how she is connected to Miles in this movie, kind of how she comes back into the plot. And we're introduced to the kind of a Citadel of Rick situation, a Citadel of Spider-Man, as well as another major character in the story, Miguel O'Hara, the Spider-Man 2099, who is also, I guess, a classic Marvel character. I did not know that. And from there, Gwen and Miles have to work together to stop the Spot from running amok across the Spider-Verse and potentially destroying everything, as well as another villain in this movie who I'll kind of go into here in a little while. So, I think it's going to go without saying this. Everything you've heard about this movie, all the praise that it's been getting, it's well-deserved. This movie is fantastic. I've said before, Into the Spiderverse is one of my favorite animated films probably ever. And while I would say I like that movie a little bit more than this one, this movie is still really damn good. Again, in terms of animation, like it's phenomenal. I would actually say the animation in this movie is maybe a little bit better than the first one. Like, one thing I like about this movie that they do is each universe, I think I read somewhere in an interview that they try to give each universe its own distinct look. And that's something that I noticed watching this. Like in the opening segment of the movie, we see more of Gwen's universe. And what I really like about it is that it doesn't look just like Miles. Like Miles has like kind of like the sharp outlines. Like it actually kind of looks like a comic book scene come to life. But Gwen's actually has more of a pastel look. Like some of the colors kind of bleed together. Like you see the inside of her home that she lives in with her dad. Like the background, it looks like it almost looks like pastel or paint or something that kind of like bleeds together. And I really dug that about it. And not only that, but like the colors seem to change too, depending on the mood of the characters. Like there's moments where we see like Gwen talking to her father, and when the mood is really down and kind of somber, there seems to be colder, like bluer, purplish colors on screen. But then when things kind of lighten up a little bit, you see more brighter, warmer colors like orange and yellow and stuff. And I love how they did that. They definitely use color and animation in this movie to really help express like what's going on. This is definitely a visually stunning film. If you can't tell that from the trailer, you'll definitely see it when you see this movie. Even from like within the first few minutes of watching this movie, I could definitely tell this was going to be a visual treat, and it is. Like, this is definitely going to be one of those movies that you're going to need to watch multiple times, because there are just so many, not just in terms of the details they throw in there, but also just like little Easter eggs that are sprinkled throughout the movie. Like, I know I missed probably 100 different things, if not more, watching this film, but this is definitely going to be something I'm going to pick up on Blu-ray as soon as it comes out, because I think it really is that good. But yeah, I'll just kind of go over it a little bit. A lot of the same voice cast from the first movie shows up in this one. You have Shameik Moore returns as Miles Morales, who is fantastic as his character. Miles Morales, I think, is very quickly becoming one of my favorite superhero characters. I love him in the video game version, and I love his character in this movie. He feels like a very distinct character. I really like him. You definitely get the sense that he is this underdog character, just trying to prove himself, trying to do the right thing, but he's like, in the first movie, he still has that underdog feel to him, but you definitely get to see his sense of growth. In this movie, we see him from the perspective of he's become an accomplished Spider-Man, and he's no longer trying to prove himself. Really, he's just trying to find the balance in his life. He's trying to balance between being Spider-Man, but also being, a 15-year-old kid trying to get into college, dealing with all that stuff, as well as trying to keep his identity a secret from his parents, but also not, hurt their feelings or anything like that. And you get to see some comical moments with that in the movie too. I actually like the stuff with him and his parents in this film. Like, Miles' parents in this movie feel like genuine parents. You can definitely kind of see the concern they have for their son. They don't really quite understand what he's going through, because they obviously don't know he's Spider-Man. And it's like there's like that internal struggle he has where like he wants to tell them, but he can't. And there's parts as in the audience watching this, I kind of found myself kind of rooting for him, just like, come on, man, just tell him, like, let him know. But of course, you kind of know that he can't do it. But yeah, his character is fantastic in this movie. It's like he never feels cocky, even like in his initial fight with the Spot. Like, it's comical, and you can tell like he doesn't think the Spot is really anything to be worried about, but there's never that sense of cockiness from Miles' character. He just feels like a genuinely good person. Let me see. I had some notes written down here. Haley Steinfeld, she returns as Gwen Stacy. Her character is fantastic too. They definitely give her a lot more to do in this movie. Gwen has a much bigger role in this film than she did in Into the Spiderverse. Again, like, the whole opening segment is just her character. It's like 10 minutes before the main title, actually, before you even see the title of this movie, we just see her and her background and the tragic backstory of her and her universe's version of Peter Parker. And also, like, the pretty heartbreaking scene between her and her dad. We get to see that, like, how her dad is he's the police chief, and there's this moment where he finds out who she is. He finds out that she's the Spider-Woman of that universe, and she actually has to leave because he finds out about that. It's a pretty genuinely heartbreaking moment, and you really feel for her character. And I really like that I like what they do with her character in this movie. I like that they go more in her backstory. I like that she's given more agency within the story. And I like how she is actually the one who is part of the secret spider society, whatever it's called in this movie. Like, she's the one that joins them. It's actually not Miles, which I thought was a pretty interesting, like, twist in the movie. And I'll kind of go into that more here in a little bit. Of course, Jake Johnson, he returns as Peter B. Parker. I freaking love his character from the first movie. He has a noticeably smaller role in this movie. He's still in it, but he doesn't show up for probably at least a good third of the film. But once he is in there, he does have a fairly big role. He has some pretty good lines, but his role is definitely diminished from the first movie, which I think is one of the reasons why I like this movie just a little less than the first one, because I love his character. I think he's great. I think he provides a lot of the heart of the story. So the fact that his role was slightly diminished, I think, I don't want to say it hurt the film, but I just felt like it was missing maybe just a little bit of the charm the first one had. But I do think that Miles and Gwen help carry the movie in their respective roles. And I like that we get to see more of a kind of a blossoming romance between Gwen and Miles show up. It feels organic. It seems genuine. I love the little heartfelt moment they have where they're sitting upside down on the on that building. That shot when they're overlooking the city and the city is upside down from their perspective, that is like one of my favorite shots in the whole movie. I love that shot so much. Like, I could just sit down and just draw that whole entire frame. It's so cool looking. But I like I like Jake Johnson's character in this movie. Jason Schwartzman as Dr. On or Own, the Spot. He is honestly one of the standout roles in this movie. His performance is fine. It's kind of funny. Like, whenever I hear him talk, I always think of his character Klaus from the Netflix series, or Netflix movie. Sorry. So it's so funny. I picture Miles fighting Klaus from that movie. But he does play this role very well. And what I like about it is, and I don't want to go into this too much, but this just because I think if you kind of go into this not knowing kind of about his past and how he's connected to the story, it makes it hit a little harder. But I really love when they talk about his history, kind of like why he's doing what he's doing, his connection to Miles. Like, once you kind of learn about it, it is kind of like a oh shit moment. And it's a nice little tie-in to the first movie. It kind of makes me want to go back and watch the first one to kind of see if I can catch maybe something that I missed in there. If you watch this movie, you'll get what I'm talking about. But again, I like the Spot, I like his powers, and I like the idea that like he's sort of this bumbling idiot in the beginning of the movie. The opening scene he's in, where he's in the grocery store and he's trying to steal their ATM, and the owner's he's chasing him around with a baseball bat. And like, I feel like in any other movie, the way they would handle that is the villain would already have his powers figured out and he would just be running amok. But in this one, he's running amok because he doesn't have his powers figured out. He doesn't understand how they work. And it leads to some really funny, but also kind of, when you think about it, kind of scary moments too. It's like this dude can create portals to other dimensions. Like, as he puts it, he has the power of the multiverse in the palm of his hands. And he doesn't have control over that. That really should be a pretty terrifying person, honestly. But I like how he goes from being this not so threatening, almost just kind of like would-be bank robber, into being a legitimate supervillain, like to the point where like he might even be threatening to people like Thanos or Kang the Conqueror. Like, they do a really good job of building him up, and I like the animation style on him too. You're going to hear me talk a lot about the animation in this movie. It's hard not to, just it's so good. But yeah, like, I love how his design looks. Like, he's got like this all white body with like these little black spots. His design almost, like, me and my buddy, we saw this in theaters, and my buddy had pointed this out. Like, his design almost kind of makes me think of Rorschach in a way from The Watchmen. The way his spots kind of move around a little bit as he uses them. I like that he takes the spots off of his body and uses them to create portals. That's a cool idea. There's all kinds of really creative ways that they use his powers, and also in terms of how they use it in the animation as well. And of course, his powers that does lead to more of the multiverse stuff, which we've seen a lot of the Marvel movies. I am going to be honest, I'm getting a little burnt out on the multiverse stuff, but I will say in this movie, it feels fresh, it feels interesting, and I do dig it quite a bit. Also, another thing about his design, about the Spot's design, I want to point out is I like how you can actually see like the lines in his body, like the design lines that artists will use when they're drawing like human forms, like different poses. I like how you can see that on the Spot. It's kind of cool. Like, when you look at his knuckles and stuff, you can see like the little circles for like each of his knuckles. I like that they left that little detail in there. It's kind of interesting. Like, if you're not paying attention, I could see where some people might miss it, but it was really cool. And finally, the last character, and kind of the secondary antagonist of the movie, is Oscar Isaac as Miguel O'Hara, Spider-Man 2099, who is, and I don't really know much about this character. I guess he's kind of they describe him as sort of like a ninja vampire Spider-Man. But yeah, he kind of plays sort of the secondary antagonist of this movie, and it's like he's a very straight-laced by the book character. He basically is the leader of the Spiderverse, the Spider Citadel, essentially. He leads all the other Spider-Men. And his job is basically to keep the multiverse intact, make sure that there's no anomalies, and trying to take out characters like, well, kind of like the Spot in a way, characters that threaten the stability of the multiverse, or the Spiderverse as they call it. There's another longer name they give it, which is, as they describe it, it's kind of a weird, silly name, but yeah, like they actually address it as the Spiderverse in this movie. But his character, I think he's played very well by Oscar Isaac. It's pretty obvious from the get-go that he's a villain. If, like, from the very first frame they introduce him, like, it's pretty clear to me that he's a villain in the movie. I don't think that's going to be much of a surprise to anybody. We do see some of his story. That's kind of a running gag in this movie. They always go over the backstory of every Spider-Man, so I like that they do that with this movie quite a bit, and it's almost kind of treated like a joke. But yeah, we get to see some of his backstory, his tragic backstory, and kind of like why he's doing what he's doing. And I will say, for the most part, they do a good job of making him, you can understand why, like where he's coming from, like why he's behaving the way that he is, even though he does come off as definitely a bit of a lunatic. I'm just kind of curious if we're going to get more of his background in terms of like why he is the way that he is. Like we see like there's a scene where he's injecting himself with this serum, which it looks like it's to kind of help keep his powers intact or give him Spider-Man powers. Also, just like his whole vampire thing, I'm really curious if we're going to see more of that in the next one. But yeah, it seems like they're setting it up in the next movie for him to be, I don't know if he's going to replace the Spot as the main villain or if it's going to be kind of a two-villain thing. It's going to be interesting. But yeah, I've talked about the characters a little bit. I just want to talk a little bit more about the animation because I'm definitely an animation snob. I love good animation. And man, this movie, God, if nothing else, this movie is so good looking. Like, if you're only going to see this movie just for the sake of the technical aspect of it, of the artistic endeavor the creators went through with this movie, I mean, you're not going to be disappointed. There are just so many great moments in this movie, just so many awesome scenes, like well animated scenes. Like I can't even imagine like how much work it went into making this film. Like, I mean, number one, it seems like the movie, the artist had a lot of fun creating it. There's a lot of heart went into this movie. It's very clear to see that. And like I said, just so many moments of creativity, like the Spider Citadel, like all the different Spider-Men that are around. You see different designs of them. Like there's the Spider-Man from like the Insomniac video game, which I thought was really cool. I like they added his character in there. We even get to see some live action moments in the movie too, like with the Spots character, which I thought was funny. Kind of a callback to other Spider-Man movies. There's even kind of a nod to the live action films, like with Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire, which I thought was really interesting as well. I don't know if they made any reference to Tom Holland's Spider-Man films. I didn't catch that. If they did, I missed it. It went over my head. But yeah, there's a lot of references there. Even like the meme, where it's like three Spider-Men pointing at each other. Of course, they had to sneak that in there. You kind of knew that was coming. Like I said, there's tons of just little Easter eggs in this movie. One of the ones that really killed me was like when Miles is trying to escape from the Spider Citadel. He's got like literally hundreds of other Spider-Men and Spider-Women chasing him. And one of them is like the old classic comic book Spider-Man. And he tries to swing into Miles, but because he's a two-dimensional character, it cuts to a different angle and Miles goes right by him. And it's like, I really love that they added that little joke in there. It happens really quick, and if you're not paying attention, it's so easy to miss, but I love that they put that level of detail in there. There's a lot of moments like that in this movie where it's very clear to me that the creators were having a lot of fun with this. They were having fun creating these, not just adding in older Spider-Man characters, but adding in new ones too. Like, what is it? Hobie, the punk rock Spider-Man. I love his character. Like, I love his design, how he's got like that. He looks like a design that should belong on like a punk rock album. And he has like his whole entire design is outlined in that. He's almost kind of like this 3-dimensional, but also like at the same time, kind of like this 2-dimensional heavy ink character. I love that about his character, the way he looks. Like there's a Spider-Woman who's like, she's almost kind of like a Ready Player #1 type character where she exists like in a virtual world. That's really cool. And like her Spider-Man character is like her avatar. That's an interesting idea. There's a freaking scene where there is a T-Rex Spider-Man. I shit you not. And it's just as ridiculous and awesome as you could possibly expect. It's like almost on the level of Everything Everywhere All at Once, but with Spider-Man, in a sense. It gets so ridiculous, but at the same time, you buy into it, and it's really fun. It's just a fun movie. I loved it so much. Now, I will say this, and I'm going to kind of start getting into maybe a little bit of the criticisms I have for this movie. I was a little disappointed. I'm not necessarily going to hold this against the movie, but I was a little disappointed that we didn't get to see more of Peter Porker or Noir Spider-Man from the first movie in this one. Those two characters they do show up, but it's not till the very end, and they have no lines. Now, I don't know if it's because they couldn't get Nicolas Cage or John Mulaney to reprise their roles. That's very possible. But they're not in this movie, and I really like their characters, and that was kind of disappointing. Penny Parker, the anime Spider-Man from the first one, she is in this, but she only has one line, and she doesn't really show up until near the end of the film. So the original cast from the first movie, that was there, except for Peter B. Parker, Miles, and Gwen. Most of them, like the others, aren't really there. So you only really have half the cast from the first movie. Now, of course, I mean, it's not like the characters from the first movie, it's not like those three characters I just named. It's not like they really had much character to them. They were more like caricatures of Spider-Man, but still, I really liked them. I'm sure a lot of fans like them, so it does seem like they're setting up for them to have a much bigger role in the third one. So hopefully we'll get to see more of them. I personally would have liked to have seen more of them. But yeah, so I mentioned before, like I was going to start talking about some of my criticisms of this movie. So one criticism I have, and this isn't a big one, but the movie is fairly long, and it does kind of feel like it. I think I checked the wiki, and it's like 140 minutes, so it's just a little over 2 hours. It kind of feels like it. I mean, there was never a moment where I was squirming in my seat and checking to see what time it was, but I do feel like there were definitely, towards the end of the movie, I kind of felt like, okay, this seems like this should be where the movie ends. And then it kind of kept going. I was like, oh, okay. But not a big deal. But yeah, I think I read somewhere on the wiki page that this is the longest, at 140 minutes, this is officially the longest made animated film by an American studio. So that's kind of cool that it broke that record. I would say for the most part, it flows pretty well. It doesn't overstay its welcome, in my opinion, but you do kind of start to feel, at least I personally felt the length of the movie a little bit. So in that respect, yeah, it feels a little bit long. Maybe it could have been trimmed down 10, 15 minutes possibly, but overall I think it works. Another criticism I have about the movie is I don't know how I feel about the two different villains they set up in this movie, like Miguel and the Spot. I liked it when it focused more on the Spot. Miguel was interesting, and I can definitely see where they're going with his character, and I think he is an interesting, compelling character, and he's played very well by Oscar Isaac, like very well. Like, I think Oscar Isaac is a phenomenal actor. But I don't know, like it kind of feels like the movie kind of goes back and forth with him and the Spot in terms of like who is the main threat supposed to be? Because it feels like in some moments it's supposed to be Spot. But then you have Miguel's character who is trying to prevent Miles from interfering in his own timeline. He's trying to prevent him from saving his father because his father is essentially supposed to die. The Spot essentially is going to kill Miles' father, but Miles wants to stop it. And Miguel can't let that happen because it'll disrupt the whole, the canon, the Spider-Verse canon, as they call it. It's something that's supposed to happen, and you can't disrupt that or else it can destroy the universe. And don't get me wrong, that stuff is interesting, and I thought it was very compelling, but I just kind of wonder if maybe the film would have been better if it tried to focus on maybe one of those villains instead of the other. Like, maybe this movie could have introduced the Spot, he shows up, and then Miguel shows up, and Miguel is kind of the main villain, but then it sets up for the Spot to be the big villain in the next movie. I'm not sure. Like, that's the thing is, I don't know if there's a right answer to that question, but I guess I don't have a problem with it. I guess I just have concerns on how they're going to figure that out in the third film, especially since in this movie, there's a pretty clever twist towards the end where Miles ends up in another universe where he meets another version of himself who is actually the Prowler. So it's basically an evil version of Miles. And the way this movie ends, it almost seems like they're setting up there could potentially be a third villain. Again, I don't know where they're going to go with that. It's interesting. I don't want to spend too much time talking about that, but it looks like they could potentially have 3 villains in the next movie. So I'm going to be very curious to see how they handle that. I mean, I think the writers and the makers of this film have proven that they know what they're doing. So, I mean, I trust them. I'm not saying I don't, but I'm just very curious to see where they're going to go with this. Maybe they'll pull it off and it'll work out really well. And the thing is, despite all that going on, I do feel like the movie does feel pretty focused for the most part. There was never a moment, despite it being a movie about the multiverse, I do feel like they did a pretty good job of keeping things relatively simple as you can when you're talking about the multiverse. It's relatively easy to follow. There was never a moment where I was confused about like what was going on, who was who, what each character's motivation was. I do think the movie does a very good job of laying that out. And again, like I said, I do like that the movie uses color and the animation to really express what's going on in the characters, like with their thoughts. Like with Miguel's character, there's this cool moment where we get to see like his eyes turn red when Miles escapes, and it's very clear in this moment that he is supposed to be a villainous character. There's a lot of moments like that in this movie that I really appreciate. As far as any other negatives go, honestly, pretty few and far between. I will say there are moments in the movie that I feel like the writers I feel like they try to over-explain things a little bit. Like, there's parts where they'll have like word bubbles show up to kind of show us like what the characters are thinking. Like Miles, for example, we see that a lot in this movie. And I don't have a huge problem with it, but there's definitely moments like where they have like there's when they explain the big twist in the movie, they actually literally explain it to the audience. Like Miles is actually thinking it, and they actually have word bubbles show up so the audience can see what he's thinking. And it's like they have to explain like, oh, this is what happened, this is where Miles is, and this is now what's going on. And I'm not crazy about when movies do that. I guess maybe the reason is this is supposed to be geared towards not just adults, but also, kids and stuff. So maybe they're doing that for the younger audience who might not quite catch it. But I don't know. I feel like the movie does a good enough job with the story that most people will be able to follow it regardless. So that felt a little unnecessary in my opinion. I don't like it when movies have to spell things out for you. Like, I hate to make this comparison because this movie is leaps and bounds better than the live action Avatar: The Last Airbender movie, but that movie was definitely a great example of a movie that over explains the characters' feelings. Like, the characters don't express their feelings, they tell you how they're feeling. Like, the character doesn't act sad, they tell you they're sad. They say, "Oh, this makes me sad. I hate to hear that. That fills me with sorrow," instead of actually having the character cry. And I hate it when movies do that. It's like the old Hollywood saying, show, don't tell. Don't tell me the character's sad. Show me they're sad. Show me them crying or doing something that would convey to me that they're sad. And again, I'm not saying this movie does that, not to that level, but there's a few moments in the movie, just a couple, I think, where they explicitly spell out for the audience what the character is thinking. And I don't know, maybe they could have just been better if they just left that alone. Just like, we know what the character's thinking. We don't need you to tell us, but whatever. As far as positives go, to me, the positives far outweigh the negatives in this movie. And like I said, the negatives for me are really just kind of nitpicks. The positives, I mean, Jesus, the animation alone makes this movie worth watching. Again, like I said, the voice acting is stellar. Every single character in this movie feel genuine, they feel great. Like I said, Shameik Moore, Haley Steinfeld, Jake Johnson, they are great in their respective roles. I think they fit these characters perfectly. Everybody in this movie plays their character exceptionally well. The action sequences are great. There's some really cool creative stuff they do with every character's powers, not just the Spider-Man, but like the Spot, the way he uses his powers to travel around and to fight at the same time. I like the way they handle the different designs of the Spider-Man. I love the way they design the different universes they go into. Like, there's a Lego universe. Also, just to kind of go on a little tangent, one of the first major villains that they run into is the Vulture, but it's the Vulture from a dimension where everything is drawn like in Da Vinci style, like the Da Vinci designs. So you have like Gwen Stacy's Spider-Woman character fighting in her pastel animation, like in her universe. She's fighting a Da Vinci design style Vulture, and it is insane, but it's so cool looking. It's like, I don't really quite know how else to describe it. It's like, it's not visual vomit. It looks good. It's like a visual waterfall, but like a geyser, but like you understand everything that's being conveyed to you. Like, I think this movie is a very clear indication that the writers and especially the animators had a very clear vision, and they knew exactly what they wanted to do with this movie. And I think it shows throughout the entire runtime. Like I said, I think it's a little long, but I think overall it flows very well. So to just kind of cap everything off with my overall thoughts on this movie. If you love the first movie, stop thinking about it and go watch this movie. You're going to love it. It's fantastic. While I do think the first film overall is slightly better than this one, I still think this movie is really, really good. And who knows, my opinion on that could change. I mean, I'm sure if I watch this movie again, I might like it a little bit more. Who knows? But it's still really good. Like, if I had to give them a letter grade, I'd say the first movie is like a solid like 98, 99%, and this is probably like a 96, 97. Like, the difference is negligible in my opinion. The voice acting is great as always. Each actor and actress plays their respective roles fantastically. The animation is top notch. I mean, I don't think we're going to see movies animated like this again in a very long time. This is grade A stellar animation, the likes of which I don't think I've ever seen in any movie before, and I really hope that this is not the last we see of these kinds of movies. I don't know if the Spider-Verse is based on any particular comic or anything like that, but I personally would love to see a spin-off series or something based on these. I thought I read somewhere that there were talks of maybe a potential spin-off series from this. If they do it, if they keep making movies like this, I can get behind this 100%. These are the kind of animated movies I want, where like it's not just that they try to tell a compelling story, but they actually use the animation to elevate the movie into being something even better than just your typical, like, you know, kid-friendly animated flick. So yeah, this movie definitely gets, 2 thumbs way, way up from me. Even if you're not a fan of Spider-Man films, even if you're not a fan of superhero movies, if you just like good animated films, I definitely encourage you to check this movie out. But what did you guys think? Did you enjoy this movie, and how do you think it stacks up with the first one? And are you excited for Beyond the Spider-Verse when that comes out next year? Please feel free to let me know on my YouTube channel. All right, buddy, that's going to conclude this episode. Once again, I am on Anchor, Spotify, and YouTube. If you like what you heard, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll catch you all next time. Later.